Hi, John Wellington here. I'm back again to talk about my set, the John Wellington Limited Portrait Set. So this set was conceived as a way to just start painting flesh. I love colors. I want to have as many oil painting colors as possible, but sometimes it just gets a little bit overwhelming. And I want to have a more simple entry point into painting. And over the years, I've realized that with very few colors, you can say quite a lot. Now, that doesn't mean that that's what I paint with all the time, but it's often what I start with. So when I was asked to conceive of the set, I thought of the colors that I needed. So let's open it. So the first color, of course, is white. In this case, I'm using titanium white. The reason for that is it's not a toxic white. I mean, don't eat it, wash your hands, do that with all oil paint, with, as a matter of fact, with any art supplies. But it's a great white and beautiful to have. The second color is raw sienna, which I think of as a yellow. It's a very beautiful color, and it's great for flesh because it doesn't read as yellow, it reads as yellowish. Next color, black, ivory black. Now, I have talked a lot about the use of black, and anybody who knows me knows my thoughts on it. I find this to be an invaluable color. And yes, I think of ivory black as a color. And I know people who are thinking about color theory or the science of color or the optics of color will have a different argument, but I'm thinking of it as pigments in a tube of paint. The next color, burnt sienna. So this is like raw sienna, except burnt. It's, in theory, dirt from around the town of Siena that when it's raw looks yellow, and when it's burnt with fire, it turns brownish. So it's burnt dirt, and raw dirt and burnt dirt. And now the last color is viridian. And I included this in the set, not for my flesh, but as an underpainting color, because this set does have two purposes. It's an underpainting set and an initial laying on of flesh color. And this color right here is how I painted Sir Walter Raleigh, or what I imagine he looked like, because I made this face up and it happens to look like Sir Walter Raleigh, or as I refer to him as Mr. Raleigh, because I don't know him that well. But I made it up, and because I'm filming this in Raleigh, the spirits of him just seem to come through me. So this is painted with viridian, with a little touch of black and, of course, white. It's a great underpainting color. It is not traditional. Traditional would have been terra verte. That's an earth green. That's a much more subdued color. But I've started so many of my paintings with viridian underpaintings that I thought, if I'm going to have a set, why not have a color, not that's traditional, old master, but why not the color I use? I mean, that makes sense, right? John Wellington uses viridian. So these are colors that, for me, would be, if someone said, what colors do you need? These would be the first ones I would take. And then I would ask for some others. So let me put these out. When I'm setting up my palette, I like to think of an order, of a mise en place of how I want my paints. Everybody should have their own order, but I would suggest when you put out your paints, always keep more or less to the same order. So for me, usually I have my reds on this side and my yellows, then I have my browns here, I have my black next to my white, and then I have my greens and my blues. That's just the way I do it. You can do it any way. But I would say keep it the same. And the reason for this is because it's easy to find. And you don't want to be thinking about where your colors are day to day if you're painting 5 days a week, 6 days a week. It's like going into the kitchen and one day your whisk is hanging on this hook and the next day it's hanging on another hook, or your kitchen knife is now in the wrong drawer. You want to know where everything is. So the more I can plan that out, the better. So let's see, I'll put my viridian here. Probably not going to use much viridian today since I already have the viridian painting. but I will keep it out anyway, just to have all the colors out, and you can see how they look. Again, these are Tusc Pine paints. I'd like to say I had a small part in these, in testing them over the last couple of years with the color makers and with Heather, who conceived of this. And they really tried to make the most beautiful paints possible. And I have, for anybody that looks at my paintings, most of my paintings of the last year and a half have been done with Tusc Pine, either with the Tusc Pine paints that are now available, and before that I was using their test paints. And so I love them. Just love them. So anyway, I'm going to leave these here. Now, I am going to do something else. So now that we have these colors, the first thing I like to do is I like to actually see what the color is. So the first one I'm going to take is I'm going to take white. I'm just going to put the white up here and just see. And this is the titanium white. And just see that it really beautiful. Titanium it's a lovely white. It's an all-purpose color. It can go very opaque, and it covers quickly. Different whites have different properties. Zinc white is a more translucent white. I actually don't paint with zinc white, but many artists do. At least I don't paint with zinc white in oils. Next color I'm going to put up is ivory black. Ivory black is a lovely black. It is no longer made with ivory bones. That's where it got its name. They stopped doing that many decades ago. There's my black. So now I have black and white. I will, if people are interested in this, down the line I have two other underpainting colors that I love and use. Actually, I have three, but two more that can be done in the set. One is black and white. That's a grisaille, and that is a beautiful underpainting. It's traditional. It was used by Eng. It was used by Vermeer. You'll see it often, and then the other underpainting that I love that's used by Rubens and countless other artists, Van Dyck, are brown and white. And this right here is my burnt sienna. And the fourth color, of course, is that same dirt from Siena, although I'm not sure where this dirt came from. Maybe it did come from somewhere in Umbria or Tuscany. This is my raw sienna. Now, I will put down the Viridian just so that you can see it at 100%. Viridian is a little bit less of an opaque color. It has a little bit more translucency to it. And I would suggest that when you buy oil paints, that you take the paint and you put it out like this. Now, Tusc Pine does something really amazing and time-consuming, which is they actually hand paint the paint on the label. These are the brush strokes, and they hand paint them and they cut them up, and they attach each one to every tube of paint, so you can actually see what the paint looks like. So it's very, very helpful. However, as helpful as this is, if I'm getting a new paint, I still want to see what it looks like on the canvas. So I just suggest doing this. And now the next thing I suggest doing is with a palette knife, I suggest taking each color down with white. So here I'm going to and this is where you start to get a sense of the range, because at 100% you get one story, but it's very hard sometimes to see what a color is just on that one story. It's when you start to take it down that you start to see its nature. So like if you have, let's say, 5 different browns, say you have burnt umber, you have raw umber, you have burnt sienna, you have Van Dyke brown, I don't know how many listed there, 4. There's colors like red umbers that are all different browns. You start to really see their characteristics, what pulls cool, what pulls warm when you start to mix it with white. And here, hopefully, you're starting to see some of that. So there, seeing different browns. We can start to almost see it's almost like starting to go into flesh tones. We're going to do the same thing with this yellow. I say yellow, but this raw sienna. I think of the raw sienna as a yellow. I don't just think of it as dirt from the town of Siena. And then we'll do the same with this black. This set was inspired. I did not come up with this. I didn't come up with this idea of these colors. This idea of flesh predates me by hundreds and hundreds of years. It was used by artists like Velázquez, otherwise known as Velázquez. Un cerveza, por favor. It was used by countless artists because it got you in the ballpark and the pigments are inexpensive. This set actually is not a lot of money for super high grade oil paint. It's actually quite reasonable. And so when paint was very expensive and often unattainable, this was a great way to paint most of your flesh. And then you came in with other colors as you needed them. So I think of these as a salt and pepper. This is a salt and pepper seasoning, and then you add the more expensive seasonings the more sophisticated flavors as you get into the flesh, as you get into the paintings. That could be alizarin crimson, that could be, well, they didn't do this in old masters because it's too expensive, but nowadays ultramarine blue, which replaces lapis lazuli. So you had one pigment, lapis lazuli, the stones, mined from Afghanistan that are exorbitant in price back then and today, recreated through chemistry in the 19th century that are quite affordable. So there are other colors that you use down the line, and the old masters had to do this because it just was, you used lapis lazuli for the robe of the Madonna in a Pieta or a Madonna and Child. You didn't use it in the flesh. So nowadays we think about color very differently. When I say nowadays, I mean over the last 200 years. All right, so let's put these colors down. And I'm just doing this to show a range so that when I start to paint Mr. Raleigh, or Sir to you, in flesh, you sort of see where I'm getting these from. Let's get it even lighter. Now, it turns out from my research on Wikipedia that Sir Raleigh was Caucasian. But I do want to point out that these colors will get you in the ballpark of any tone of flesh. So I'm just going to be painting him one way, but please do not feel that you're limited to any one skin tone. Here's the raw sienna. I have to say, every time I put out these colors, I just, there's a part of me that's going, oh my God, these are so beautiful. It's another reason to do color testing. And JerrysArtarama does have color testing pads, one for watercolor, one for oil paint, and when I say watercolor, watercolor gouache, and one for oil paint. If you don't have them, they're really affordable and they're incredibly useful. And the oil painting one is on canvas paper. There. So here, look, we're just seeing these ranges. Really beautiful. Do you feel how red this looks and how yellow that looks? So when we look at the label of a paint, raw sienna, burnt sienna, we don't think of, oh, that's actually here. Look at my hand. Comes right there to the arm, that it starts to approach. You can feel it right there in this range. So, and I haven't even cross-mixed yet. And here's the grays. Now I'm not going to do a grayscale, but I am going to, I mean, I guess it is a grayscale, but I'm not doing a real grayscale. I'm just lightening it up. And here you can feel that the gray, what does it look like here? It starts to look blue. You feel how cool that is compared to these. So that's the coolest, that's the warmest, and this is in between the two. So now I have these, and then where I cross-mix them, that's where we start to play. So this is what I'm giving you, and the green, I didn't do the green because the green is here, but let me just do one with the green just so the Viridian doesn't feel left out. Sorry, Viridian. There we can see. But I'm probably not going to use Viridian in this. So this becomes the coolest. I hope you see how helpful this is, not just for you, but for me, to even see the colors out like this. Sort of, what do I have here? One of the things about being overwhelmed with lots of colors, it's that you can get lost. You have all these colors and it becomes intimidating. And so when you take your colors out like this, in a way you become familiar with them. They become your friends and you go, oh, that's what it is. And of course I always take notes. I note that I'll say this is ivory black, and I will say this is burnt sienna. I'll say this is raw sienna. I'll say this is Viridian. If I'm using different paint companies, which you should not be doing, you should only be using Tusc Pine. But if I'm using different paint companies, I will label the paint company. So I would always say, you know, T&P on all of these. And so I had my record. If you do this, it's so invaluable. And it'll help you so much. And each time you go, you know, if you go to JerrysArtarama and you're looking at colors, you go, oh, I'm going to get King's Blue, or I'm going to get Brilliant Pink, and you do that and you label it, you really all of a sudden become familiar and you take away the intimidation of a beautiful tube of paint to really understand what you can do with the color. So I just think that that's just great practice. And of all the color theories that someone could teach you, you know, this is on the opposite of this color wheel, or the Munson, you know, theories, which are fantastic. All of the stuff is important, but the most important thing is the visceral playing with your own oil paints. All right. So let me address the painting. Finally, let me address Sir Walter Raleigh. Hi. How are you? You look a little greenish, a little sickly. So what I'm going to do today is try and bring some of this to him. A number of my students are very interested in glazing. Glazing means laying on transparent color on top of something usually dry. And before I even get into glazing, let me just say that in order to do this, this must be dry. So I pre-painted this so I could do this demonstration. If I had painted this right now, and tried to paint these on top, what would happen is these colors would mix into the green, and I would not get the results I would like. I don't know today if I'll even get the results I like, but certainly it would be a road to failure. So if you do decide that you like underpainting, what's known as grisaille, these grays, or in greens, verdaccio, there's an Italian word, you want it to be dry. And here you can see it's absolutely dry. Now, when my paint is really dry, and I will get back to glazing, one of the things I will sometimes do is I will take some mineral spirits and I will just wipe it over the whole face very lightly. I do this for two reasons. One is if it's been dry for a while, it's not going to get picked up. But I find with the mediums I use that if they've stayed for a while, sometimes when I put on a glazed medium, it won't adhere. And what the mineral spirits do is they bite into my mediums, and they give it a little bit, on a molecular level, they allow for my next medium to sit on and not bead. If this has ever happened to you, I'm telling you, this is the quickest fix ever. It's something, I make my own mediums, and so it's something I have to do, and it's worth it, and I wait for that to evaporate. The medium I'm using is a medium that is made by Tusc Pine. It's called Svelte. It's going to be out soon, and I've been testing it at home. I just did a painting with it, and I love it. So it's, with the advantage of that versus my medium is outrageously expensive, way too expensive to buy. And the ingredients very difficult to obtain, and to be able to go to a store and buy a medium pre-made for you that you can use, that's not like mine, which would be over $100 with real sun-thickened linseed oil that takes months of linseed oil out in the sun, covered in order to thicken, time-consuming and expensive. To be able to actually use a medium that does everything I want it to do without all that work is fantastic. So our color and medium scientists have been developing one that I'm loving, and I wish I could show you the bottle, but I have it in here in my test. And so now I'm going to go back to glazing. So all glazing is, for anybody who's scared, it's a transparent layer on top of a dry layer. That's it. What's the right color to glaze with? I don't know. There's some colors that are better than others, but you experiment and play. So let me do a glaze. I'm going to do a glaze of these colors. So you can see here it's the medium. That's the solvent. Solvent is to clean my brushes. Medium to extend my paint. Clean brushes, extend paint. Never put these in wine glasses, never put them in water glasses, never drink these. Never. Don't do it. So here I am with medium and raw and burnt sienna, excuse me. I'm just going to do that right here, like that. And that's a glaze, guys. If you ever knew what a glaze is, think of watercolor. I know when I was being told about glazes my freshman year at the Rhode Island School of Design by this wonderful teacher, Grisaille Melanson. She made it so terrifying to me. Like, oh, to glaze, you need to practice for years to get it just right. And I know what she was trying to do. She was trying to scare the hell out of me. And she did. But it's actually simpler than that. It's just playing. So here's the transparency. And I'm going to define glaze also. So here's the transparency of the raw sienna. So I'm going to define glaze, and this is a partial truth, as not having any white in it. A fully transparent glaze, even though it's translucent, does not have white in it. The moment I put white in it, I don't call it, I call it a semi-transparent glaze. So there's my raw sienna, there's my burnt sienna. While I'm at it, I'll just glaze Ivoridian. I'm just doing this. And the thing is, that's a very heavy glaze. More medium, the lighter. The less medium, the heavier. Again, think of watercolor. And it's funny, this medium is doing something here that I want to point out to you. That's what I want my medium to do. But let me put this in. This is the black. So these are glazes. Now, I'm not going to glaze with my white because based on my own definition of glaze being a transparent application, transparent, you can't do a transparent glaze with white. White is opaque by its very nature, and the most you can do is, I could thin it out more, but it's just not, it's always going to be translucent. There is no way. Now, this medium, I put a lot of medium on, and I also had some mineral spirits on, but you can see it's running, but it's not running very much. And if I had done this in linseed oil, just pure linseed oil, not, let's say, what the paints are made with, it would run much more. So actually, I'm going to stop these from running. But these don't run much, and if my brushes didn't have mineral spirits, it wouldn't run at all. As a matter of fact, where my brush is drier, it becomes something called fixotropic, which means the medium holds its shape. So now, I'm going to throw some glazes on this just to show you guys glazes, but I will say that as a rule, I don't recommend glazing on a greenish underpainting. It's not as convincing as if I did an underpainting, let's say, in my black and whites or my browns. So if I did an underpainting in this range or a mixture of these two ranges, the glazing works immediately. On green, it can work on flesh, but we'll see. You know what? Let's see. So I'm going to do a brown first. See how this works. Medium. It's watercolor washes. At some point, I am going to have to put on my glasses. So one of the things I love about glazing, well, there's many things, but one is that it just quickly changes the whole with almost with zero commitment, almost zero commitment, 2% commitment. I can immediately change the nature of this. See how fast? Now, if I was working opaquely, I'd be putting on paint. And if I don't like a glaze, let's say you do, so people are always asking me, what's the right color to glaze? And as I said earlier, I don't know. But the thing is, you can try one. If you don't like it, if you don't like the glaze, you can wipe it off. You try wiping this off, it's going to drag all the way down here. So glazes are a very quick, very versatile way of applying paint. But there's some caveats to glazes. I'm going to give you, the rules of paint, right? The rules. Most rules are meant to be broken, but there's some rules that just don't break. And here's a rule. A glaze will always darken. Will 100% always darken what's underneath it. See right here? That's darker than that. That is darker than that. So knowing that a glaze will always darken, if you do a painting that you're just going to glaze on top of it, you need to go very bright. Now, what if you say, well, John, my underpainting, I didn't go that bright in the lights. What do I do? Well, you can work lights into your glaze. I have a term for it. It's called couching. I will get into that in another video. We will really talk about glazing. I just figured that since this is dry, even though I'm going to go more in with levels of paint like this, I figured it's fun to just start with this and throw it out there. I always, when I'm working on one video, I always like to tease you a little about what can come. Here now, I'm going to try yellow. I will say that in my paints, for anybody who's familiar with my work, this is how I often start. I do an underpainting, and then I'll go in with some glazes, and then I will work semi-opaque and other layers in. So let's try a bit more. Now, one of the things I did not do in this, because I did it in another time, is I didn't cross mix these colors, which is, of course, how you get an all range of different colors. I just wanted to really just take down the set for you. But here, when I'm painting, I will, of course, start to cross mix. So here's the hair. Let me go in a little bit thicker. And again, I'm just doing this transparently because it's such a quick way to get the basics of color in. How are we doing, Mr. Raleigh? Can I call you Walt? Is that too informal? I feel like I'm starting to know you, so I feel Walt, right? Sir Walt, does that work? Yeah, I don't think he's going to have brown hair, but why not? Let's start with this. You see how quickly, and look how thin this paint is. So for anybody who's ever thought, oh, I want to learn glazing, this is it. You can do the eyebrow. And because it darkens things like shadows in the nose, this way you just don't always have to work opaquely. You can if you want, but you don't have to. Brushes I'm using today, as I'm using this beautiful brush, I might as well tell you. I'm using the Hamburg Premier. It's a Creative Mark is the brand. And I love these brushes. They are a synthetic mixture, I think, that they mimic quite well the Badger brushes that I used to use 35 years ago that I cannot find anymore. Or if I find them, they are terrible because the hairs aren't good. So the brushes I use at home are these. I use the Badger and some other brushes you'll see me using. They're all the Creative Mark brand. They just do the job. They last quite a long time. And you can see what my strokes are like. My strokes are pretty rough, and they just do a good job. So, okay, I got some glazes on. Maybe I'll do some more yellow glazes. Transparent. Now, again, glazing over yellow is not going to be as satisfying as glazing over a true grisaille, a black and white. If you glaze over a true grisaille, you do this, and it almost looks like a finished painting. And there's some artists that you can see, like Sir Joshua Reynolds, a few other artists that basically did that. They did a black and white grisaille, and then they just did some simple glazes. Usually they would use a vermilion, some sort of brighter red just for certain areas of the cheek. Gainsborough, same thing. Very much a grisaille, and it works. Okay, so I have this now. And it looks like a greenish painting with some browns and yellows. So I've done two things here. I've done a glaze, but I've also done something called oiling out. And what oiling out is, it's not something I do all the time, but in a glaze I don't mind doing is I put the medium on here, and this gives it now a wet feeling. And you can tell when I'm getting serious when I put on the click glasses. There we go, click. That means I'm getting ready to really paint. So now I'm going to use the Berlin brushes, same brand, Creative Mark. These are not, I'm not sure what they mimic. They're just a nice synthetic brush that I like painting with. They're soft enough, but not too soft. I'm always looking for brushes that can do the marks and the job I want to do. So now I'm going to start painting. I like to paint by redrawing, so I'm going to go in with just pure brown. I find that I like to stay away from my whites for the longest period of time, and the reason for that is white, it's harder to wipe away. It's more committing. So at this point, when I'm just sort of getting re-familiar with my painting, I might use a little bit of black with that brown, which starts to make a more of a burnt, takes it away from being burnt sienna to a little bit of a more of a burnt umber, you see? See how I at home I usually use a hand palette so that I'm not leaning over, but I think for the video I thought it would be nice to have the palette overhead so that you can see the colors being mixed. And if I'm using a hand palette, it's harder for you guys to see. So these are the sacrifices I do for you. I hope you really appreciate it. Why do I use a hand palette? Use a hand palette because it's less movement of my body. So for here, you see me reaching down. With a hand palette, I'm working like this. So it's just convenience, and this is why I think of a hand palette as a portable table. It's a great invention. It stopped being used in art schools because it looked old-fashioned, and and also if you're painting like Jackson Pollock, if you're painting like late de Kooning, it would be ridiculous to have a hand palette. You're using house paints and you're doing this, or big giant house paint brushes that you use in your home, and so having a small palette is crazy. So here you can see after my glaze, now I'm going in with more opaque paint. But look how thin my paint is. So you go, well, why are you painting so thin? Why aren't you just putting on the paint like this? Well, the fact is I could. But if I was going to put my paint on like this, why would I bother with an underpainting? So the whole reason to do an underpainting is for a certain way of painting. It's not the way of painting, it's just a way of painting. It's a way of painting I love to teach because it's not as, I don't think it's as self-evident maybe when you're in a museum, when you look at a Rembrandt or a Vermeer as, let's say, like an Alice Neel or a de Kooning, or, there's all these different artists that a Cezanne, you can look at a Cezanne. A Cezanne is gorgeous, but you know how those what the layering is like. Even a late Monet, sophisticated as a layering of a Monet water lilies painting, you can see how it's done. You go, oh, I understand how this is constructed. But I know when I'm looking at an Ang, there's always 4 words that come to mind. And it's this. It's how he do that. It's really the how he do that. And so that is, and I love the looks of it. And so it's done with thin layering, with transparents, semi-transparents, semi-opaques, and of course some opaques and impastos, but it's a variation of many, many different types of layering. So here, now on top of the green is the brown. Now his hair I don't think is going to be brown, but I'm layering. So I'm going to do sort of in one sitting, I'm going to do a couple of sittings of indirect, always correcting my drawing. So now we see it's changing a little, just a little. Remember, the more medium, the more glazy, the more transparent. The less medium, the darker. So I think among the set, one of the things is, how do you vary paint? And at some point I will, if I haven't shown that, I will one day have to show how all the different ways of applying paint. Here's another trick, a brush with no paint. You see how I put that brown there? Rather than using a cloth to take it off, I want to move it around. I can take a brush with no paint. For any of you who've ever studied sculpture, you don't always apply clay. That's not how you sculpt. I mean, just clay sculpture. You apply clay and then you take a tool that you move the clay around, you take your fingers and you smush the clay. It's very similar. So when I'm painting, I feel very much like that. I use and do this. Okay, so here I feel like I've had my transparents. I'm taking this brush without paint to sort of soften areas. You see, it's just like in charcoal drawing, it might be your thumb or it might be a stub that you do this with. So this has no paint on it. Well, it has a little paint on now because I'm painting, but basically just softening. All right, so now I have that. I've basically just worked my darks, but not quite where they're going to be, but the ballpark. So now I'm going to play with my lights. Now, I didn't cross mix these two before, and I won't do it now as well. Okay, I said I won't do it now, and then I just did it. Wow, you can see how consistent I am. I'm not going to start at my edge. I'm going to start here. Now, that's very heavy, so I'm going to take some paint off. There's a formula in my head that's very inexact, which is always how much paint versus how much medium do I have on my brush. And there is no correct answer. It's just a correct answer in a situation. So if I'm working impasto, which means thick paint, that means no medium, lots of paint on my brush. If I'm working a glaze, it means very little paint and lots of medium on my brush. Right now I want some paint, but not a lot. And this is basically, right now, my raw, well, I was going to say my raw sienna, but now I'm going in with my burnt sienna. Going darker, but more medium, less paint. And you can just see that I'm just dragging it off. Because I don't want, so one of the things when I'm teaching indirect painting is I don't want to obliterate what's underneath it. And the reason for that is that if I was to obliterate what's underneath, why bother in the first place painting the underpainting? So if you're painting the underpainting, you always want to have even if you don't see the underpainting, you want a hint that it's there. Right now you can see I'm working on my lights. Okay. If you ever don't know what color to paint with, or that you feel like you're just not hitting your mark, try not to get too upset with it yourself. Art is like one of those, it's like the one thing that we feel we don't need to warm up for. Of these types of activities. We always feel like, I always tell my students in class that show up late and they're all stressed out because they've been on the subway because this happened or that happened. And I always say, look, I'm not angry. Take a deep breath, relax. And I said, and move slowly. Because what happens is when you're late, you rush. It's like, oh my God, I'm late and I gotta rush. But rushing doesn't get you the answer. Being calm gets you the answer. Taking your time, taking a deep breath, go, okay, I'm late, I'm here, let me warm up. Warming up. That's the one thing that artists don't do. So I try and stress with my students and with myself, because I'm the same way. It's human nature. I don't have a lot of time, let me rush. But if I try and rush, I don't get the results I want. And it's funny because I spend a lot of time like thinking about athletes, thinking about actors, thinking about people that are not in my arts. And when you go to, let's say, a hockey game, you see the players, they're stretching on the ice. The goalie is doing in the locker, in the hallway of the locker, they're catching the ball. They're warming up. They don't just show up and then just play. They spend all this prep time warming up their body, getting their body familiar with the movements that they're going to do to play a game. Baseball players, first baseman and third baseman, throwing the ball close to each other and then stepping back little by little. Pitchers warming up before getting on the mound. All of these dancers, everybody warms up. Actors doing their in the dressing room, rehearsing their lines with themselves or with a partner, practicing. Painting's the only time we go, okay, I'm here with a painting, now I need to look at 100%, and it doesn't work like that. What happens is you paint and you're not getting your marks, you're not understanding exactly what's going on, your color mixing might not be that good, but what happens is if you take your time, it gets better. So I can't stress that enough. Take your time. And even in this demo where in theory, I shouldn't be taking my time because I got a demo to do for you guys. But even in this situation, I know I have to take my time. I know in order to do something decent, I have to move slowly, look, think, care. And here I'm working semi-opaque paint. So you saw me first with glazing and now with semi-opaque. If the camera could capture it, which I'm not sure it can, you'll see that even through all of this, you will see the green coming through. So just keep doing this. Semi-opaque. So take your time. You won't hit your notes right away. You might feel like, oh, nothing's going right. So if you take your time to warm up, just understand that you're not going to mix your best colors right away. You're not going to be familiar with any of this, that eventually you will be. Eventually you're going to go where athletes go, where actors go, musicians go. You go into the zone. And it just takes time. Now, unfortunately, if you have a matinee on a Wednesday on Broadway, once you hit that stage, you can't warm up while you're on stage. If you have a game at Le Centre Bell in Montreal, right, for the Habs, the Canadians, once you're on the ice and the puck drops, you got to play hard. But before that, they warm up. We as artists, we don't take time to warm up, so we usually end up warming up on our own art, which is a little unfortunate. It would be great if we had a bunch of practice strokes, but we just don't seem to do that. So given that we don't do practice strokes, we just be aware that you're not going to hit your best notes right away. Many, many years ago, I taught an actor for a film called Incognito how to look like he could forge a Rembrandt. And this is where I came up with the idea, because he wanted to hold the brush and do his own painting. And so I had him doing basically practice strokes so that the camera could come in like this, and it would be this actor named Jason. I'm not going to give his last, why not? Well, Jason Patrick, sure, his last name. He was in The Lost Boys, for anybody that old enough to remember that movie. And so he wanted to be able to be the one holding the brush, in the act of painting. And so I spent a month teaching him, and in these exercises, I realized, I'm giving him warm-up exercises like a baseball player or a hockey player or soccer or a dancer or a musician, like everybody but artists. And so when I've had students who really, every now and then you have a student that said, I love art, I want to start painting, but I can't draw a straight line, I know nothing, I've never used oil paint. That's the first thing I start having them do, is put the paint out, then do drawdown exercises where they just learn how to move their brush. And all of a sudden, they go from not being able to paint to being able to paint. It's kind of wonderful. So if you're ever really stuck, going, oh my God, this is going terribly, think about that. You can see I'm just gliding the paint on, not a lot of paint. It's this way of method, it's about a slow buildup of paint. Very, very different than indirect painting. I mean, very, very different than, than direct painting. where you're putting on paint, very different than just building up impastos. And, you know, if there is no right, you hear me say this all the time, there's no absolutely zero right or wrong way to create art. I will stress this any single time a camera's on me. I stress this every day with the most important thing in creating is loving to do it. The amateur, being devoted, having devotion, just at the moment that you're creating, that becomes the most important thing. You do all that, you're doing it right. But, you know, but I like the different styles. I like, you know, looking at Rembrandt 1 minute, looking at a Rothko the next, looking at an Ingres or a Franz Hals or a Sargent or an Eakins. I'm going to take another brush without paint. I'm going to do something now called battajando. That's a dabbing. So before you've seen me do hatch strokes like this, and now I'm just going to start to unify. So this is going to be a very blended, this way of moving. I use the term battajando. I've never seen this term in writing. It was a term that was taught to me by a teacher of mine back for too many decades for me to age myself that much, a long time ago. And his name is Michael Aviano, and he saw me blending in a certain way, and he goes, "Oh, John, that's battajando." And I go, "Well, Michael, what does that mean?" He goes, "Well, it means to dab or hit." And he said Leonardo wrote about it in one of his sketchbooks. Now, I've never seen this sketchbook. I've never read it. But ever since he told me that, I have repeated it like it is gospel. So even though I cannot back up the term battajando, I believe in Michael Aviano, and so I just use the term. And hopefully one day, maybe someone will say, I found it in a sketchbook of Leonardo's, or if not Leonardo's second cousin once removed. So one of the things I always forget to do when I'm doing demos like this is actually to look at what I'm painting. So right now, I'm looking, done looking. Let's see where I want to go, what I want to correct. For people who have studied with me, they know there's something I always say, which is, I correct my corrected corrections. My whole life of being an artist seems to have been making adjustments, making changes, looking. Now, on one sitting, on paintings like this, there isn't really a lot of time to really reflect. But at home, that's what I spend a lot of time just looking and thinking, what can I do to make better? Right now, I'm mixing some black in with my paint, with the burnt sienna and the raw sienna. It makes something, now I'm doing a little bit more complicated mixtures. And you see it's covering the green a little. And this, I was doing the battajando stroke before. And right now, I'm doing more of a hatching stroke. You can see the hatch. Again, it's that stroke like this. Very much like if you were drawing. So sometimes I'll have a student or an artist that will come to me and they say, well, I've had artists that are really successful, but they only draw. They do gorgeous drawings and they're like, I'm afraid to paint. I don't know how I'd paint. And I look at their drawings, I'm like, just put a brush in your hand and some color. Exactly the way your hand moves when you're drawing is how your hand could move when you're painting, and you will be doing amazingly well. So a lot of these strokes that I do are often the same strokes I do if I was doing a pen and ink. So here now you can see how I'm taking away some of the green. You See? Doing incrementally because I don't want to, the last thing I want to do is obliterate my underpainting. Because if I was going to obliterate my underpainting, why bother with an underpainting? The whole reason for indirect painting is to sort of keep remnants of it, the ghost of your underpainting. So if someone looks very closely, they go, what was that underneath it? Now you might not always be aware of it. And next time you find yourself in a museum and you're looking at an Eng or a Johannes Vermeer or any of these artists that worked in these indirect ways, Hans Memling, Hans Holbein, countless artists. So here I'm pushing my lights. And I'm going to show you in 1 second what I mean by blending kills your lights. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just something to be aware of. So watch. I'm going to take some white paint here. I'll do it with this. See this paint right here? This is opaque. It's thick. And now watch what happens the more I touch it. So I'm going to touch it with another brush that doesn't have mineral spirits on it. Here. Touch it with this brush. Watch, see how bright that is? Watch what happens as oh, this does have mineral spirits on it. Oh well, do it anyway. It'll still work. Watch what happens as I take it down. See, it gets darker. See that? Do it again. Do it just with this brush. Here it is bright, or bright-ish, and as I take it down, with less, it gets darker. So without even mixing a dark end, you see I avoided that dark, it gets darker. Less paint. So do it with white. And as I take it down, it gets grayer. Do you see that? That's super important. That means when I kick up a light like this on Sorali's forehead, when my brush starts to hit it more, or right there on the cheek, or even right here, when my brush starts hitting it to blend, it's going to get darker. So I'll talk about something I call reestablishing the lights. And often when I'm painting, I will build up the lights, and then I'll blend, and then I'll need to re-kick up the lights. And this is just a process I do. In sculpting, it's the same thing. You're adding clay, and then you're smoothing the clay over. And as you smooth the clay over, you're taking that rise of the clay and you're subduing it. And so sometimes you need to add more clay to that and rebuild it up. So whenever I'm painting, I actually think a lot of sculpting in clay. So now I can build up a little bit more opaquely in some areas, slightly, right? Because first I've been very careful to not, but I'm not doing it everywhere, just in little bits of areas where I feel I need to now take advantage of that. So now I've gone from transparent to semi-transparent to semi-opaque to moments of opaqueness. I like painting people with hair for obvious reasons. Because sometimes I have dreams where I look like when I was young, where the hair is in my eyes and I'm looking in the mirror and brushing it away and going, oh, this annoying hair. I do not have those problems anymore, unfortunately. Now I am streamlined. I'm efficient for walking down the streets of Manhattan. So the thing with hair is it's soft. I'm not saying that you can't, for stylistic reasons, put an edge on a hair that's like this, like a super hard edge, like that for your hair. I mean, you can make it very graphic. But when you're just looking at people, usually the hair is softer. It's softer than this edge. Just like metal, like a hard, sharp piece of metal, like a knife, a katana, a Japanese sword edge is going to be sharper than if you're painting a katana, it's a sharper edge, let's say, than someone's flesh, or someone's like cloth, like this cloth is a softer edge than this brush. Everything have different edges that sort of determine what they're made of. And hair just happens to be this very soft edge. So when you're painting, unless again you want something really, a statement, graphic statement on the hair, stay softer. You know, and then when you need to go harder, you know, you can always go harder. I found that this is another rule of mine. It is always easier to harden an edge than to soften an edge in paint. And I guess I'll have to define that for you at some point. Soft edges versus hard edges. But I will say, so if you don't know what the edge should be, go soft. Guys, I'm now going to use a small brush. So I'm using this very thin brush right now. This is a number 2, and it goes much thinner than that. But I'm doing this because I actually want to get the pupils of the eye. This is, by the way, this stroke you've seen me do it maybe, but it's kind of more like a scrubby stroke. See, I'm like going like that. It's like a hatch mark where I don't lift my brush up, so it's kind of like that. So all these different strokes. And again, like everything else, if you start getting used to me, there's no right or wrong way. It's really what works for you at that moment. And I always, you know, whenever a teacher says, oh, this is how you do, this is the right way, this is the wrong way, it's like, yeah, kind of. Not maybe, but maybe not really. You know, this is not a, you know, brain surgery. This is painting. Use the brush that you can use, mix paint the way you want to mix paint. Just be aware of options. When someone tells you do it this way or do it that way or don't do this or don't do that, just think that really what they're doing is they're really introducing you to options of working. That, you know, might be like change your life and be like, oh my God, what this person said is so good. After they said that, I can now, you know, paint that flower, I can paint that battle scene, I can paint, you know, whatever it is you want to paint. And, you know, that's what you're looking for. You're always looking for people to help guide you, to not guide you to be them, but guide you to be you, right? You don't really need to be an artist like someone, like your teacher or someone else. They're already that artist. You just want information from different people that help you. You know, like anything I can do that you just take, like if you watch my videos and there's 2 things that you picked up and you go, that works for me, then you use that. And if you, other things I'm telling you, if they like, no, I don't really like that way of working, then you just don't do it. Okay, I'm going to put this flat down. You can notice the flat sort of puts a more opaque-ish feel on it, but it's covers, and I do love it. But now I'm going to go back and do some battejandos, and I'm looking for a brush that's dry. Here we go. Beautiful, beautiful brush. Okay, that's the mark. You can feel it. Tapping, hitting. Softening, creating that halftone, that blurred edge between the light world and the shadow world on a curved object. And each time I hit it, though, what happens? It gets darker. So I might have to reestablish my lights again. So I'm going to try and hit around the edge of this to keep that brightness, you see? And so this is a brush without paint. And now as it picks up paint from here, I might bring it back into there, or I might bring it back into there. So here on the nose, to get that turn of the nose, this very gentle tap. So if you're ever wondering, like those blended edges in a Holbein, like how did they do it? This is it. Or one of the ways, I should say. There's never one way of this is it. I mean, you can, if you look at a Giovanni Bellini or a Leonardo, there are some where they show the fingerprints. So they were using their thumbs to blend as well as brushes. In other words, use whatever you can to get the effect you want. It's kind of a bulbous nose. Let's see if I can unbulb it. I took some of the paint off here, but I'll also take some of the paint off there. Now, after this dries, if any of you are interested, there are some more videos I can do, which are different underpainting colors. So I mentioned that in my set, I do underpaintings in black and white, raw sienna black and white, and of course green and white. So my flesh painting set is also a underpainting set. And if you're interested, I would like to do for you guys a demonstration in black and white underpainting and a brown and white underpainting. And I'd like to go back into this, again, if you're interested, and show you how to glaze and take a next level of colors after this to bring it one more step. After the salt and pepper, maybe we add some cayenne. So let me know. Let me know in the comments if that's something that interests you. And if it is, I'll head back down to Raleigh and we'll play some more. And by the way, I know you're supposed to be suffering as an artist and everything, but you know what? When you look at all the really great artists' works, and even when you read the writing, there was doubts and there's this, because all humans have these doubts and moments. Accountants have them, everybody does. But in between all of that, there is a lot of playing, a lot of enjoyment. So if you are ever doing art and you're not enjoying it, stop for a minute and think about why, because you really should have a lot of moments where it just makes you just happy to be doing it. Really lovely way to spend a life. And the longevity of being able to do it is much more than, let's say, a professional athlete. I know in hockey, you know, by the time you're 33 years old, they start talking about you aging out. And you know, if you're playing until you're 40 or 41, they're so impressed. You know, like, oh my God, you know, Jonathan Quick, he's going to be 40 years old, and you're like, oh. Meanwhile, like for me, 40 is like a kid. Like, I'm like. So as an artist, you can keep going, keep evolving, keep changing. Even when your eyesight starts to fade a little, like mine did in my 40s, put on some glasses. So all of this, what I just did right now, was a brush without paint. It's funny. So anybody who sculpts with clay will know exactly what I did. I'm softening edges. Let's see, take a tiny brush, tinier brush. Look how small this one is a 0. I know some of you are like, I will never use a brush that small. Getting highlights in. Reestablishing my lights. There's one color the white of the eyes is not, and that is white. So here I'm using grays. Something else, if you're ever interested in, let me know. A demo that I love to do is the eyeball demo. It's not a long demo, but it's a fun demo and hopefully informative. So if you're interested in an eyeball demo, please let me know. I love coming down here to Raleigh. I love doing these things. So if you have interest, just let me know and we will do them. Give him green eyes. So I'm going to use basically the underpainting is going to be the color of his eyes. A little too green. One of the things with painting is knowing to make adjustments. So you put something down, it works, great. It doesn't work, stop. So as you know, it goes too light, you don't like it, adjust it because it's just paint. Believe me, you know, you hear me say that in all the lessons to you guys, it's just paint, but you know who I say it most to? Me. Just to remind myself sometimes when I'm really taking it way too seriously. It's just paint. Except for this moment, where it's much more than paint because I really messed it up. This is serious. No, it's just paint. I'm just going to go a little bit darker. There we go. And for anybody that tells me that Sir Walter Raleigh's eyes were hazel, or they were brown, or they were any other color than what I painted, you're probably right. But he's wearing contacts. I think, isn't that, I need to get that fact checked. Can someone tell me if Sir Walter Raleigh wore contacts? I'm sure. I put down a mark and I soften it. Again, this is just one way of painting, but after this demo, hopefully what you're going to do is you're going to look, next time you're in a museum and you're looking at like 19th or 18th century painting, you'll go, oh yeah, that's how it's done. You know, it'll like just sort of take a little bit of the mystery out of it. Eyeball. That is the clue of my whole demo. That it is a ball. How to make eyes look round. And I'm using a small brush here because these areas that I'm hitting are small. I'm doing small hatch marks. It's like an Italian artist named Crivelli. Those old tempera artists that everything was a thin little stroke, using the absolute smallest brushes for the largest of areas. Building up my lights. Now I'm going to stop pretty soon, only because at this point I could just keep taking it. I could just keep building. Once I realize I'm just going to keep painting, I sometimes want to stop because because the idea of this, my demos for you guys are never about doing a finished painting, but just sort of demonstrating process of painting. It's not. Let me get that big brush again. Soften. You see, as soon as I do that, I'm going to knock it back a bit. Again, this is for a way of painting where you're not showing lots of brush strokes. There are other ways of painting that I love where you're showing all your brush strokes. And I'm going to finish off with one, if I think I can stop with him. I think you're done for today. Talking to him. So this figure, this Sir Walter Raleigh, or Becoming My Son, or whatever he is, I might go back into him, or not, but if I do, I will go in with glazes, and I will take this now to I'll take it to the next step. And the next step would be to amp the color up through transparencies and then through a little bit of opacities. And that is actually how my paintings are made. Again, you can see the circular motions of my brush. See, I'm twisting, circle. You always see that whenever any demo I ever do for you guys, you'll always see that. I don't know what he's wearing here. Gone from Sir Walter Raleigh to a beetle. By the way, if something feels too opaque to me, watch this trick. Just take something clean. Don't wipe it away. Just ghost it out a bit. See? Soften it. Right now, something I learned in Marvel Comics. When in doubt, smudge it out. That's what I learned as a colorist. All right. Enough noodling. I could be painting on this for the next 4 hours, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to show you one last thing, and then we're going to call it a session. Here are some ways to apply paint. The first way. Impasto. thick paint, impasto, paste. It comes up above the surface of the paint. Think Lucian Freud, think Vincent van Gogh, Vincent van Gogh, or Van Gogh. Brightest application of paint you can do. Absolutely, because the way the light refracts, because it's going over hills and valleys, it just brings out highlights, which is why in old master paintings, areas like the nose or the cheeks or the forehead were often impasto paint. Areas such as armor, like in the Rembrandt's painting of the man with the I think it's the gold helmet. I think it's still considered a Rembrandt. I'm not sure if they changed their mind, but that is thick paint on all the helmet. Next way of applying the paint. This is opaque. Opaque is if you look around the walls of your home and you've just painted it. That's my definition of opaque. Opaque is you moved into some new house, some old house, and the walls are like this sickly green with grease stains in the kitchen, and you go, ugh. You remove all the refrigerator, you see where, the dust and the grease, you clean it, and then you paint it. And you paint it in such a way that there's no remnants of what it looked like before. And that is opaque. So opaque means you do not see what's underneath it. You've obliterated the history of the paint. It is exactly what I'm trying to do when I'm painting my apartment. It has wonderful aspects, but if you notice, opaque paint is not as bright as impasto. So impasto is always going to be brighter than opaque, but opaque is great because it covers up what was underneath, like typewriter whiteout for any of you old enough to have typed and used typewriter whiteout. Now, the next thing is semi-opaque. And for semi-opaque, I'm going to mix it with a color. Semi-opaque has white in it, but it's not covering. I'm going to give you also another idea to think of opaque. Opaque is graphic. It stops the eye. When you go into the supermarket and you're looking at packaging and you see like detergent, opaque colors. It's Andy Warhol silkscreen prints from the 70s, opaque. It's a very graphic, powerful image, poster design. It's not magical in an old master way where you see through the paint, but it has great use and great impact. Next, impasto, opaque, semi-opaque. It's opaque-ish, but you can sort of see what's happening through. Now, between the number one, impasto, and semi-opaque, we're going in more where old masters, or older way of painting was. And then I'm going to jump down to what we started with, which is a glaze. Let's do a glaze with a medium. I have some white in here, but hopefully it will just be a glaze. There we go. Like a glaze. And then between the semi-opaque and the glaze, if you add a little bit of white, then we have semi-transparent. So here we have transparent or a glaze, semi-transparent, semi-opaque, opaque, and impasto. Now there's more ways of applying paint. There's scumbling, there's stippling, there's other ways, but if you're only painting in one of these, think about, oh, maybe there's different ways. And so like, here, I'm not going to do it there, but like on a nose, I could use the tip of a nose and just be impasto, and then be opaque here, and then be semi-opaque. Oh, while I have my brush, I'm just going to do a quick impasto. Not impasto, scumble. That is a scumble. Scumble has no medium on your brush, no solvent, and it is dragging paint over a dry area. And I think of it as an opaque glaze because it's opaque paint, but dragged where you can see through it. Master of scumbling for me is Monet, the Monet water lilies I mentioned earlier, the late ones. You'll see lots of scumbling. But again, many different ways of applying paint, but here are 5 of them, 6 really, that you should know, and that's how I did this. So guys, I'm sure you're gonna have more questions, even I do. I can go much further on this, and maybe I will, but hopefully this gets you in the ballpark for now. Thank you so much for joining me again. And in comments, what demos you'd like to see from what I mentioned, please leave them in the comments below. And the people at Jerry's will let me know and we'll get them done for you. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to New York City right now and leave the beautiful Raleigh, which I love. And I'll come back next time. Bye-bye, guys.